As this season continues, we've talked about shame, pain, quiet faithfulness, fragile trust, and unresolved stories. Today, we're moving into something very practical, and I'm not sure if you're like me, but I like the practical. But this is often a topic that is very tender for parents. Boundaries. Not boundaries as punishment, not boundaries as withdrawal, but boundaries that protect love and not punish it. Because for many parents, boundaries feel confusing. They can feel unloving, and I get that. Or they can feel selfish or like giving up. And that's not what we're talking about here today. Hi, welcome to Still Faithful, a Bridge Between Us podcast series for parents walking hard, unresolved parenting journeys. I'm your host, Melinda Patrick. This is a space for honesty without shame, faith without pressure, and movement without forcing outcomes. Together, we're learning what it looks like to stay spiritually anchored, emotionally steady, and rooted in love, even when parenting hurts and the story isn't finished. For parents walking painful or estranged relationships, boundaries can feel like a betrayal. Let's be honest, boundaries can feel like a betrayal in any parenting relationship. As a mom or dad, we want to be able to give our children everything. When we set a healthy boundary, it contradicts what the world tells us is love. Hold on there. We're going to dig a little bit deeper there in just a moment and call out the truth. But for right now, you may be wondering, if I set limits, am I abandoning my child? If I say no, will they think I don't care? If I protect myself, am I failing as a parent? These questions come from love, not hardness. But without boundaries, many parents find themselves emotionally exhausted, anxious, reactive instead of responsive, or consumed. That doesn't help your child or your relationship, and it doesn't reflect the kind of love God invites us into. Boundaries are not rejection, they're stewardship. We can go all the way back to the first chapter of Genesis and see God setting boundaries. They are a way of caring for what God has entrusted to you, your heart, your emotional health, your faith, your capacity to love well. A boundary says, I want to stay open-hearted without being consumed. I want to love without losing myself. I want to remain present without being overwhelmed. That is not punishment. That is wisdom, because the best version of you is the one that is healthy, and the best version of you is the one your child is needing and worthy of. Often, the boundaries parents need to set most are emotional. You might still answer the phone. You might still show up and still care deeply. But internally, you begin to notice when healthy boundaries are set, where am I taking responsibility for what is not mine? Where am I replaying conversations through my mind endlessly? Where am I absorbing emotions that leave me depleted? Emotional boundaries allow you to love without carrying everything. They help you respond instead of react. They create space for peace instead of constant tension. One of the greatest fears parents have is that boundaries will harden their hearts. But healthy boundaries don't close your heart, they protect it. They make it possible to stay tender, to stay patient, and to stay grounded. Without boundaries, love often turns into resentment, fear, or burnout. With boundaries, love can remain steady, even in difficult relationships. I want to invite you into a reflection here. And you may want to come back and re-listen to this episode with some pen and paper. And I'll also put these questions in the show notes, so check the show notes. But take this slowly and answer these questions honestly. Where do I feel most drained after interactions with my child? What boundaries might bring peace and not distance? What am I allowed to protect emotionally, spiritually, and relationally? And let this reassurance settle in. Setting boundaries does not mean you've stopped loving your child. It means you're choosing to love in a way that is sustainable and faithful. Let's think about boundaries this way, not as a brick wall you're putting up, but as a chain link fence. You can see through the fence. The fence has a gate. You can open the gate and let the good in, and you can close the gate to keep the bad out. Friend, you are allowed to protect your heart. In fact, Scripture tells us that we are to guard our hearts. You're allowed to say no to what harms your peace. You're allowed to love without overextending yourself. Boundaries are not a failure of love. They're often what allow love to continue. This is often the point where parents feel stuck. They know something needs to change, but they're unsure what boundaries are faithful, what boundaries are wise, and how to hold them without guilt. This kind of discernment is not meant to be done alone. If you're finding it hard to know what boundaries to set or how to set them while staying rooted in your faith, I do offer coaching for parents walking this road. Coaching isn't about cutting off relationships or forcing decisions. It's about helping you discern next faithful steps with clarity, peace, and support. If that feels like something you're ready for, you can learn more at melindapatrick.org and then click on the Coach tab. I'll also put the link in the show notes. Boundaries do not mean you've stopped loving your child. They mean that you're choosing to love biblically and with wisdom. Friend, God has entrusted this journey to you and your child. And as you engage with Him, even in these difficult decisions, He will equip you for each next step. I'll talk to you next week, friend.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bridge Between Us podcast with Melinda Patrick. To find out more, go to melindapatrick.org. Once you're there, you can check out the many resources that Melinda has available. Also, you can book Melinda for your next speaking engagement. Just click on the Speaking tab at the top of the page for more information. All of this can be found at melindapatrick.org. Thank you for listening in today. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of The Bridge Between Us with Melinda Patrick.